My name is Barry Smith. I'm a professor of philosophy and director of the Institute of Philosophy at the University of London's School of Advanced Study. Welcome to my exp. Imagine we have a complete science of the world that's given us an account of the nature of reality, the nature of the mind, and our engagement with the world. It seems to me that philosophers would still want to ask questions. There's a gap that science doesn't close. There's something that the philosophers are after when science is finished. And the question is, what would count as a philosophical explanation? Now, Wittgenstein was puzzled by and haunted by that question. We know what scientific explanations are. We know that hunger to really understand and put ourselves in the right place to get a grip on what's going on in cell biology or in the brain or even the chemical structure of the foods that we eat. But what is a philosophical explanation, and what would satisfy us? Philosophical explanations for Wittgenstein are very different from scientific explanations. Sometimes they're just about seeing things as they really are, instead of looking for some underlying story or cause. But sometimes there's no need for explanation. Wittgenstein tells us in his remarks on Fraser's Golden Bough that to a man who has lost in love, what will help him? An explanation? ? To which the answer is obviously no, not an explanation. He must just bear things as they are. He just has to take them as he finds them. So sometimes we do away with explanation. And you can think in modern terms of something similar. Just before people have an epileptic seizure, they sometimes feel an imminent sense of revelation, an aura, as though there's going to be a divine revelation made available to them. And they want to have that explained. But we sometimes have to tell them, there's no revelation. This is just a neuronal storm when the two hemispheres are swapping electrical signals at great speed. So sometimes we have to talk people out of wanting an explanation. There's just nothing there. A good example of Wittgenstein reminding us not to look for explanations where none is needed, but to look for better descriptions of how things really are, is in the conversation he had with his pupil Elizabeth Anscombe, who became his literary executor. Anscombe said to Wittgenstein, "You can see why people thought that the sun went round the earth." And Wittgenstein says, "Really? Why is that?" And Anscombe says, "Well, it looks that way." But of course, Wittgenstein says, and how would it look if the earth went round the sun? Exactly the same. So here's a nice example of how you describe things in the right way and there's no longer a problem. And now we can put things to bed and we don't have to seek after special explanations. We can see the problems that Wittgenstein raises for us and the new way in which he raises it when we look at problems that are still persistent and core in philosophy today. The problem of consciousness. So quite often the problem of consciousness is posed as the question, how can the grey matter inside my skull, how can the brain give rise to these private conscious experiences, these memories, these images, these feelings that are just mine? How does that happen? How do these elusive and ephemeral things arise out of physical stuff? But Wittgenstein thinks you've already misdescribed what conscious experience or the conscious mind is like. If we thought of the feelings that I'm having when the brain is active as something that was private and personal to me, we wouldn't be able to make sense of the phrase, he hides his feelings. If feelings can be hidden, then there's a way in which they're not hidden. And Wittgenstein thought that we could see a person's feelings and emotions in their face. We can see someone's anger or their hurt. This is a way in which part of the conscious mind is on show, is expressed in the body and in the behavior. So bodily movement, bodily action isn't a surface and a cover behind which conscious experiences generated by the brain are going on in private, but rather it's when you see the mind not as a container, but as a set of activities, a set of things we do, where we see people's conscious minds expressed all the time. So Wittgenstein would have thought that the problem of other minds, how can we know that someone else is conscious? How can we know that there's a mind and they're not just a zombie or a robot? He would have thought this was ridiculous. How do we know other people's minds? Look at them. Look at what they do and what they say. You see their mind at work in how they act and how they speak. Nothing is hidden from you.